Jazz, get ready for preseason game number 1. Scrimmage is in the books, and the crowd was awesome. And Cantor can kind of dance, but not much. Talk a little bit about some of the injuries and nicks some of the guys have, who stood out, most interesting position, and more on today's edition. Plus, we'll look around the rest of the NBA, the news, the first nights of preseason games, and some BYU and Utah talk, if time permits. It's all coming up on this edition of Tip-Off. Somebody on Twitter said that they'll probably have a drum roll about the fact that we're a Stitcher Hot podcast. So I gave him that drum roll right there for you because we were rated a Stitcher Hot podcast. One of the Jazz scouts was like, dude, what is that stupid drum roll? And at that moment of humiliation, it might have been time to get rid of that stupid drum roll. So there's a chance it's out the window. For those who don't know the origin of the drum roll, and I'm figuring he's too busy to listen, but the drum roll all started because when I was working with Scotty and I switched off radio and Spence took over and I started doing this podcast, I decided that I wanted some production. And so I sent Scotty an email and said, could I have 2 production pieces done? And I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and it never came. And so out of kind of what we used to refer to as P&V on Lockdown Sports, kind of just trying to poke at him a little bit, I did the drum roll. And then I did the drum roll a few more times, thinking that it would mean that the production would come, and it's never come. So maybe I'll resubmit some production and we'll actually get something. It would only work on the audio version. I don't know how to put production on the front end of YouTube. By the way, on this whole little silly Stitcher radio thing, I feel really stupid when I tweet out, but actually it's important. And it's important for 3 reasons. One, when we try to do things with the podcast, for example, we're trying to work with YouTube to be able to customize our Locked On Sports page, and their reaction is that they won't let us do it because we're not big enough. So if we get little awards or we get nominated, we get things like that, then you have a better chance to get some of those kind of special services. Like Google Hangouts, right now we're still limited to 10, and we're trying to get that lifted. And if we have some of these awards, then we can probably get that lifted. So those things are really important. It also, people take notice, so it helps on what guests I can get on the podcast. And then the final one is maybe my boss's notice. So 2 for you, 1 for me, if we can do that. So, yeah, if you get a chance, maybe I'll resend out that link. That would be great. First road podcast of the year is always a little bit of a mystery to see whether it actually works today. So hopefully this works. This webcam I know is terrible. I've got a brand new webcam. You'll see it tomorrow from the home one. So it's pretty nice. It's a little scary. It's a little HD-ish. It's a little more of me than you'd ever want. It means I have to move, do something. I mean, I'm fidgety enough, but you actually can, instead of just being blurry, you actually can see me. All right, scrimmage was amazing on the bus yesterday. A lot of the guys were talking about just how awesome the fans were and the turnout, and they were really moved by it and fired up by it. And I think it was perfect because I think those guys were pretty tired. They had 3 two-a-days in the last 4 days going into that. That Millsap and Mo and Jefferson played. Well, Mo and Jefferson didn't play. They've got little tiny nicks, and Millsap's got a little one too, so he only played half. So those guys are pretty tired and beat up. The defense was not good in that game, but I think that's the reason why. I hope you listen to the podcast. Ron Boone, who has access to practice, who has been to practice and seen every part of training camp, which nobody else has, really shared some incredible insights that I hadn't heard on how practice had gone and things of that sort. So the podcast, in fact, if you don't have time, stop listening to this and go listen to that. And then nominate us. No, I'm just kidding. So those were really, I thought that was really, really, really good stuff. Ron, I thought, was fabulous. Hopefully the production value was all right. I kind of made that all up, built a little system myself, and put it together. So, and I'm not, as you guys know, I try at all this stuff, but I'm not that well versed. I thought Gordon Hayward was without question the best player on the floor at the scrimmage. He looked terrific, and if that's who he is this year, Jazz, that's a huge thing. I mean, he really, really looked good. And I'm talking to a few people afterwards. That was kind of the consensus: is that wow, if that's Gordon, we got a chance. It's a lot to ask out of him, but he was fabulous. He was dominating at times. He was aggressive going to the basket. He was smooth on the jump shot. He really looked terrific. Again, scrimmages are hard to, this time of year, honestly, there's almost no observations that you can really make that matter entirely. Defenses don't play as well, and it's kind of like the second half. Almost all of it's like the second half of preseason football. from a standpoint of understanding long-lasting implications for it. But there's, I think, value for guys playing together and understanding each other and rotating and all of those kind of things. I thought, there's been all this talk about Cantor, and he can move and he can do this. He blocked 3 shots above the rim. He ran the floor fabulously. He's a totally different player than he was a year ago. His personality is even more out of control than it was a year ago. But he's a totally different player than he was a year ago. That is clear. He can move. He hit the jump shot on the left wing from about 17 to 18, maybe even 19 feet out. He just looked playing differently, running differently, moving differently. It's exciting. I don't know what he's going to be, but I think it's worth, and I talked about this in one of my posts at weareutahjazz.com, to remember, he's really been dominant at every level. I mean, he started late in his career and then went to the European U16s and dominated by the U18s. He was the best player, along with Jonas Valanciunas. I think Valanciunas might have been the MVP, except for the fact that Cantor put 35 and 24 on him. So it's hard. Again, Lithuania won, so Valanciunas became the MVP, but Cantor killed him. So he was pretty much the best player in Europe here for extended stretch. Goes to Nike Hoops Summit, dominates, and then we never see him in college. And then last year he just seemed kind of out of whack. So there's a chance that he's got something going. I got an interesting question the other day, and this goes back to something we've talked about before, which is, hey, of our core 4. And I'm going to stay away from the idea of the core 4. I just, and this is probably why, who are they most similar to? And if you listen so often with fans, like, well, Gordon's the next Jerry West, and Derek Favors is Dwight Howard, which I started. But his body is the same, and he just needs to get some offensive game. I mean, if you watch Derek in that scrimmage, he was dominant in his just physical prowess. He's just a beast. His jump shot looks terrible. His offensive skill improvement does not seem to be there. His jumper is just really flat, and his shoulders are getting off skewed. Somebody kind of mentioned that thought he might have just gotten too big up top. He's lost some flexibility. We'll see. But that part of his game does not, which I don't remember exactly last year, but I think he shot about 20% from about 10 to 15 feet. That doesn't look to be any different. His shot was really flat. Now, it's only one day, but it doesn't look different if you were looking for something there. So Favors can be Dwight Howard, and Berkshey's Dwayne Wade, and Cantor's Boozer. I mean, these guys are all on the verge of Hall of Famers. We don't have 4 guys that are on the verge of being Hall of Famers here. I think we got to be really careful when we start trying to play this like, who are they game. I mean, the law of averages says that one of these 4 is going to be just okay, and maybe none of them are going to be Hall of Famers, and maybe none of them are going to be All-Stars. I mean, that's the reality of this league. It's being an all-star is really hard. There's 450 players, and you got to be one of the 16 or maybe 18. So I'm not sure any of these guys become top 20 players in the NBA at any point in time. All NBA is top 15, and I don't know. And I don't know that any of our guys ever become first, second, or third team All-NBA. And I'm not trying to damper enthusiasm, but I think that's the realistic approach, that most guys don't ever become that. LaMarcus Aldridge, who's pretty darn good. I think made his first All-Star game and might have made 13 last year. Darren took a few years to make an All-Star team. It's not, we had Stockton Malone around for so long. I think we just assume that that's what players become, but that's not. And that's why they have statues about them. So, we talk about, we got to be careful that, the biggest flaw an organization can make, and maybe as a fan base it doesn't matter, but from an organizational standpoint, is you overvalue your own talent, and then you just keep waiting and waiting and waiting, and it never happens. And I think that's something you have to be, just aware of. As a fan, sure, believe in them, believe that they're all going to come around, believe they're all going to be all-stars, but do understand what you're asking. Hey, I mean, Kevin Murphy hit a bunch of jump shots. He actually, his shot looked pretty good in the scrimmage. He had about 18 points, and looked pretty good. The most interesting position to me on the team right now is backup point guard. Watson's not practicing yet. He didn't come on the trip to Oakland. Foy, Burks, Tinsley. I mean, it's Foy, Burks, or Tinsley for that backup point guard spot right now. The story on Friday night in the scrimmage was that Alec took over. Somebody got nicked or something happened, and Alec took over the point guard position for his team and closed out the scrimmage and actually won the scrimmage by playing the point guard. He didn't look as smooth on Saturday in the public scrimmage, Foy played some point guard, looked totally comfortable there. I think both of them could probably play backup point guard for this team. And Tinsley is a fabulous passer, but his defense is a question. He's still not shooting. He used to be a hard driver to the basket in his early days in Indiana, and that hasn't come around much. So I think that position is probably the most interesting. We'll keep an eye on that in many, many ways tonight. It's radio only tonight. It's on 1280 and 97.5 FM. 1280 and 97.5 FM. Tell a friend. So everybody knows where to find their Jazz basketball tonight. A few notes around the NBA. Clippers played the other day in a opening game. Eric Bledsoe was brilliant. Chris Paul didn't play. But DeAndre Jordan and Blake Griffin combined for 2 of 6 from the free throw line. Their problem still existed, and Blake's jump shot, which has been the much talked about improvement, didn't seem to be any better. Ty Lawson hit a game-winning layup in that game for Denver. Spurs have an interesting kid, Del Solo, another Argentinian European they've added to their roster that seems to be wowing people a little bit so far this camp, so keep an eye on that. Warriors played last night against the Lakers and in Fresno, and they went on a 35-0 run. It was against the Laker bench. It doesn't really matter. I'm not saying a lot about either team. I just think that's incredible. A 35-0 run. Which reportedly got Kobe Bryant to come out from the back of the locker room where he's working out and go, "What the beep happened?" Which reminds me of the funniest story I have for you yet. Okay, if you have stuck with me for 11 minutes and 37 seconds, this story is worth it. We're on the bus driving in yesterday to our hotel, and we go through a not very nice part of town, and I'm actually I'm from here, and so I said to a few of the guys, like, hey, if you're walking around, this is not an area you want to be. And all of a sudden, we look right, and there is a guy on the sidewalk just letting it fly, just pissing right out into the middle of the street, just out there. And the bus just started roaring. I mean, this guy says, "Hey, here it is, baby. Welcome to the city." I'm just peeing right on the middle of the sidewalk out into the street. And oh my gosh, did everybody just let it roar on the bus. It was pretty funny. I texted my 10-year-old son, "Hey, this is what just happened." He goes, "Weird." It's like, "I know. I hope you never do it." He goes, "Don't worry, I won't." So now I'm secure as a parent. So anyway, it was pretty funny. There's your little story of the day. I'm sure Ron and I will sneak that into the broadcast tonight. Quick thoughts on BYU win over Utah State. You can't have your quarterback hurt on a play where you're supposed to be able to kneel down. I mean, it's just a catastrophic error. I hate to be one of hyperbole. I made the comment about the Bronco 2-point play, which they've missed a bunch of extra points since. So you kind of wonder if maybe maybe they're not hitting 50% in practice with the way the kicking is. How can the kicking be that bad in that state? I mean, this is crazy. Can't you have better? You can't get kickers. I mean, it seems really, really absurd to not have kickers. But almost as silly as the Raiders not having a long snapper that game in the NFL this year. You just can't lose games for those reasons. But I mean, I remember on the 2-point conversion, I made the comment that like it's just one of those decisions that makes you kind of go back and question all other decisions. And you look back, and the Broncos' track record is really good. So you say, okay, this one, the idea that you were running a play when you didn't need to, and you could have kneeled down, if the math on this is right, and I'm going largely off Greg Bell here. Wow. I mean, I don't know how far I want to take that. But to me, that's a decision symbolic of a lot of things. I mean, clearly some things aren't running very clearly, or some things aren't being communicated right, or you're not on top of some things. And Broncos' track record is so good that my instinct as well is just kind of a one-time error. But boy, that's a big one-time error. To lose your quarterback and I guess we'll find out more of how bad it is, to a knee injury on a play where you could have downed the football. It's bad. I feel like it's bad as it gets, actually. So that's too bad. BYU's defense is amazing. I think it'll be interesting. I think they could beat Oregon State. Oregon State's not. I mean, they're undefeated and they're winning games, and they have a fabulous defense, and they have a secondary guy that changes, and Poyer who changes games, and linebacker that's good. And I mean, they're really good, but they're not unbelievable. And I think they could beat Oregon State, and we'll talk about it more as the week goes on. Just because their defense is good, I don't know how they'll score. It's somewhat ridiculous what's going on offensively in the state. Pac-12, Arizona's offense looks incredible. Their defense is pretty porous. What jumped out to me, I watched the Stanford closely, obviously watched the Stanford Arizona game, and then also watched the Oregon-Washington game, and I just thought, I go back to a conversation between Riley Jensen and Steve T, in which they were talking about the pigeon and how Gary Anderson's whole theory defensively is that you go find one weakness and you just hammer it and hammer it and hammer it, and they called it the pigeon. Well, in the Pac-12, what has become totally obvious is that the offenses find the pigeon. Stanford lost their right cornerback, and Arizona threw left on every play and flooded the zones, and this kid couldn't react, and they just milked it and milked it and milked it, and occasionally went somewhere else, but they always went back there, and they just were unstoppable. They ran 100+ plays in a college game. Simultaneously, Arizona lost a safety in the spring. They lost another safety in the second quarter, and then Stanford changed what they were doing and just started pounding the safety. You, in the Pac-12, have to have an offense that is good enough to take advantage of the defensive pitching. And if you don't, you can't win. That's the essence of it in this conference. And I don't know really who Utah has. I don't know if Utah can take advantage of it, and I don't know where Utah gets wins in this thing. Cal suddenly looked better than they did. The home schedule is pleasant. You got the three worst teams in the Pac-12 coming home to play at Rice-Eccles in Cal and Washington State in Colorado. The problem is the Utes aren't winning at Rice-Eccles in the Pac-12. Really, what's becoming obvious is that Colorado and Utah had a much bigger quantum jump to get into this conference than people realized. And it kind of got lost in the first year, but it's become very clear that both these guys have got a much bigger jump than people realized. They're, I think, a combined 5-11 with Colorado having one of those wins against Utah. All right, see it.